This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
First, myself, maybe just a sentence. My name is Philipp Ekardt, and I'm also part of the Bilderfahrzeuge Project. And my main task right now is going to introduce and welcome Sussan Babaie, who will be chairing this session with me. Sussan is a lecturer in history of Persian and Islamic art and architecture at the Courtauld Institute, an expert, time expert in the fields that we're talking about today. She received her PhD from NYU, taught at various institutions in America at NYU, for instance. She was a visiting professor at LMU in Munich before, has published Isfahan and its palaces, statecraft, Shiism, and the architecture of conviviality in early modern Iran, has written for such venerable institutions as the Met in New York and its Persian drawings, and is currently, if I'm on top with your production, working on two books, one on architectural mnemonics, and another one on Tehran, the city, Tehran for politicals. The structure of this afternoon we agreed on would be as follows. First, Sussan is going to have some questions to our speakers, and then we're going to try to make you talk to each other, and also, if you feel like it already, you jump in, and then maybe I can back up. Our time frame, I should mention, is we have until 5. And I'm sure there's plenty of questions, but first, please join me in the formal welcome of Sussan Babaie.
Thank you very much. May I just stand? Is that okay?
Whatever,
if I sit,
whatever.
no one will see me. At the very least, I stand so you can see me. I am, first of all, thank you for this invitation to be here. I'm delighted. I'm particularly delighted to be in an event that was both great and grisly, and I think we all felt it, that this is very compelling material on multiple levels. I wanted to say, David noted the Asia House conference, which was sponsored by Iran Heritage Foundation. I want to underscore these kinds of claims to the significance of this matter. The numerous events that have taken place in various places, including through media presentations. Actually, Christy has written and interviewed. I've been, last year after Charlie Hebdo events, I was in and out of the new broadcasting house for a whole week. And I think we all understand this as being now the hottest, it seems, topic in many instances. There will be a conference, Art and Terrorism, at the Courtauld Institute of Arts in February, I think. And here we are. It's almost like the preoccupation of everyone who works with images, including the media, of course, and they are the ones who have captured this or really taken over in many ways, if I may put it that way. I actually ponder if all these activities are not, in fact, paying homage to what ISIS wanted all along, and if we have not all become complicit, as Christy noted, in some form or fashion. This is not to advocate to ignore them, but to think about the complex and multifaceted, multicentric ways that we too make a dent in this, and indeed we are party to it. I wanted to say one thing, and this is all coming out of my notes, so as I took them as the speakers were presenting them. One is that Daesh or ISIS. ISIS, by the way, is the acronym for the International Society for Iranian Studies, of which I am a board member. And each time you write a note to ISIS, you think twice. But, so maybe we should say Daesh for other reasons as well. But what I wanted to start with is that what Daesh has done is a westward gaze. This is aimed at us. This is for our consumption. It is really for our conversations. This is not something that necessarily captures the Japanese. It enrages the Iranians, for instance, because they have claims to some of these monuments. But that is not, and then there is the claim to savagery of them and civilizational capacities of us. So there is that local, regional complexity, but the entire operation of Daesh is gazing westwards. And you must acknowledge that we have been captivated by Daesh's political structure, as I think both Hugh and Christy so thoroughly really established, based on their own production of images, words, and so forth. I also wanted to say that in the majority of instances, people like myself, like Christy, like Hugh, people who work with Islamic art in particular, are called in to explain what is wrong here, what's going on here. And it's repeatedly, the issue is it Islam that prohibits images, and how is this working? The first time that this was discussed as far as I know, in any serious academic art historical way, was after the Bamiyan destructions in 2001, when Barry Flood wrote a very important article for the Art Bulletin, in which he pretty much picked on the fallacy of thinking that these are all against image acts or iconoclastic activity then, and that this is not based on theology of Islam, but it is based on the political agendas that the Taliban had set for themselves. And he went as far as shaming then head of the Met, Philipp de Montebello, for having claimed that they did everything to save the Bamiyan statues. The point about this is that both sides of this argument are indeed compelling and valid, that there is indeed, as David said, a theology here, having to do with image making and image destruction. And Islam is party to this, but it's not the only one, as David was also presenting to us. But that it is neither a matter of absence of images or a fear of images, nor necessarily a love of images. In other words, my observation of these talks and my own research in this takes me to the point that the complexity is really more than just iconophilia or the kind of phobias that we attach to Muslim reaction to images. In both cases, they are really a conversation with a Euro-American hegemonic approach. And that probably is where we, by distancing the conversation from it or unpacking it in a different context, perhaps the iconoclastic activity and destruction that David was talking about would make better sense to us as well. And I think evidence of this theology is what Hugh was talking about, going back to that moment of purity and claiming material evidence, memories, constructed memories of a period where theology of Islam was yet untouched. it was pure, it was clean, it was closest to the Prophet himself. There is indeed a theology to it. And I wanted to thank you all three for really provocative, interesting, thick descriptions, if I may use a very popular phrasing of it. And I wanted to, in fact, instead of posing questions, think if you would talk among yourselves, but also in relation to the fact that these two are not even two sides of a coin, but integrated, intertwined aspects of what various activities out of Daesh, Taliban, don't forget those in power like the Saudi regime and so forth. These are not outside of our conversation. You cannot put it all in one basket. In other words, these are, and then what of the other side of it, the Iranian side, for instance, the Shiite side of the discussion. And indeed, I would want to also encourage a conversation along the ways of what David was talking about, the kind of the somatic sensory responses. I am convinced that there is a post-traumatic syndrome, kind of an activity here, affecting people who observe these things. Not the ones who inflict destruction, but those who observe the destruction. That has some kind of a lasting effect. In any case, I apologize if it is not a set of questions but reflections, but perhaps they will generate some conversation among you, actually.
Thank you very much. Who wants to jump in? Who feels addresses the question? Who is addressed? Do you want to go?
Yeah, I'll just start off by actually taking a little bit of an issue with something that you've been saying there, that this, that what we're seeing in this Daesh presentation of itself at all levels, both at the level of literary and of images, is primarily addressed to us in the West. This is not what I'm taking out of reading the whole mass of the Daesh stuff, which is a wearisome and tedious and slightly revolting and unpleasant exercise. But a lot of it is addressed to the Muslim community widely, but also particularly the Muslim community in Syria and Iraq. And it's addressed at delegitimizing the Saudi royal house, for example. There's a very interesting particular, a minute or two to talk about. Daesh refers to the Saudi royal house in Daesh as Al-Salul. Al-Salul Shuhad. And it took me some time to work out why Al-Salul. It's nothing to do with what Saudis call themselves, but there is a typically perverse Daesh logic to this. The Prophet Muhammad, in his time in Mecca, in Medina, had a number of enemies who were called munafiqeen, hypocrites and so on, people who pretended to be Muslims, but in their heart of hearts were hostile to Prophet Muhammad. And the leader of these, and the one who comes in all the Muslim tradition, is called Abdullah ibn Ubay. Okay? So, Abdullah ibn Ubay is a well-known name as the leader of the Muhammad. What very few people know off the tops of their heads, it took me some time to find out, is that he is Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul. And so what this choice of the word ibn Salul, the Banu Salul, for the Saudis is doing, is attaching the Saudis to the hypocrites who pretended to be Muslims but opposed Prophet Muhammad. And that puts them in their place. But what is so typical of Daesh about it is that it does it in such an unobvious way. I mean, you have to know that Abdullah ibn Ubay was the son of Salul, or grandson of Salul, and most people don't. Yeah. And it's the way, it's very typical of the sort of discourse of Daesh that you have to know, you have to be an insider, if you like, to understand what's going on. And if you're not an insider, if you don't have this knowledge, then that's your fault, that's the worst for you. It means you're not truly on this Islamic wavelength, if you like, that they're using. So this is a discussion that is related to the Saudis, but it's related to other people in Syria who believe almost exactly the same thing as they do, as that to delegitimize them as well. And vastly more of David is concerned with these people than is with us crusaders, who, you know, were bad at evil and terrible and so on, and that's a given, so to speak. You don't need to try and convince people about that. Everyone knows that. But so there is a local.
No, I don't mean it, yeah.
You know, I don't think we should. It's almost a sort of narcissistic thing, except it's all directed at us. No,
actually, I think I took a note of the fact that you mentioned the elite groups that would understand the references of the Daesh literature, actually. And I do understand the literary or the nature of that sort of references. But there is something about the theatrics of the visual and the performative that is indeed used for recruitment, and largely recruitment from communities in the West, the Muslim communities in the West. So in many ways, what I do indeed agree with you is that internal targeting of the Muslims that are in power. But at the same time, this is about a clash of sorts, an iconoclash of sorts as well. We cannot ignore the fact that the greatest reaction and the greatest sort of theater of operation in terms of images is in this context that we occupy, in fact.
Yeah.
So in many ways, indeed, what you say is absolutely correct, that this is aimed at the Saudis in large part, the Syrian and Iraqi. And you were talking also about sort of Iraq as the major site of this is Saddam replacement.
That's right, and when we think about destroying statues, we have to not forget that one of the key iconoclastic moments in Iraq was the downing of the statue of Saddam Hussein. And yet we don't speak publicly about what is the pathology of American iconoclasm. We don't ask that question, do we? And many of the other statues that are pulled down in Iraq are statues of Jesus Christ and the Virgin Mary, the statue of Ibn Tamam, the great poet. ISIS in Libya has destroyed Pharaoh's horses in the city of Derna. So you see these destructions guided to all sorts of civilizational complexes and different kinds of items, if you like. But I'm glad you brought up Wahhabism, Saudi Arabia, and also both of you, the Buddhas of Bamiyan, because we've had that same discourse with the Buddha of Bamiyan, and yet more and more as time unfolds, biographies come out from those who were forced to destroy the Buddhas of Bamiyan, and those who were forced to dynamite them with the Hazaras. Right? Yeah. So it was a form of punishment against a local Shi'i group by the Sunni Taliban. So it was directed against this minority, forcing them to destroy an icon of their own local heritage. And let's also not forget that the Buddhas were a UNESCO site, so it's declared a World Heritage Site, as are many of these sites in Iraq. And so it seems to me quite paradoxically and perniciously, as soon as a site in these zones of conflict is demarcated as World Heritage or UNESCO and it receives Euro-American funding, it becomes a sitting duck. It's a prime target. Because as soon as you lay sanctions, say, on Afghanistan, then revenge will be taken in the form of iconoclasm both against an UNESCO heritage site which happens to be a rallying point for a minority community of Hazara. So there too, I feel that the Buddha's Advanced haven't received the critical discourse that they've necessitated, but it's become more clear that these desires have to carry an enormous load of dynamite on them.
Yeah, actually, as I said in that paper, there was this one phrase, canonicity counts when it comes to the selection of targets. But I wanted to tell a brief story. I had one or two other comments because I thought your remarks were an amazing overview of the issues raised. I was very grateful. We could have gone home after that. So thank you, Susan. But I hadn't intended telling this, but I remembered that I was once asked, immediately after the pulling down of the statue of Saddam Hussein, to write an article for the Wall Street Journal. I'd resolved I'd never write to the Wall Street, but never mind. So I wrote an article about the Wall Street Journal.
I signed that in all my classes, why do people for advanced
Right. So, and you know, I went through the theological reasons, and I said, okay, you know, Muslims, think they don't like statues, whatever theological reasons I could find, and I pointed to the fact that they beat the face with the sole of the shoe, a particular sort of Muslim form of disdain. So I went into this whole thing, and I did my comparative bit. This is also what happens in the age of digitization. A week later, I discovered, it was pointed out to me, that the Wall Street Journal had cropped the pictures of the pulling down of the statue of Saddam Hussein so that the American Marines who had organized the whole operation were cut out. So it looked like a spontaneous display of Muslim anger against the statue, where in fact the whole thing, I mean, I've got actually pictures of this, the before and after images. So you see everybody really getting mad, hitting the statue and, you know, pulling down, they got the ropes up. And then the original pictures, this is what you can do in age. The original pictures showed the Marines handing the ropes to the people to pull down the statues and putting the American flag over the top of the statue and so on. So I was wrong. But it is to some extent exemplary. I think there is an issue which I always feel sort of worried about, which you raised, Sussan. And that is, and I wonder what you think. When I first started writing about iconoclasm, it was in the West, and the Rijksmuseum refused to give me pictures of the attacks on, I mean, of the mutilated image.
Yeah.
On the grounds that if I wrote about iconoclasm, it would encourager les autres. And, you know, now we are really, as iconoclastic acts multiply, so are the academic symposia. I'm not saying that we encourage this, but it fits a bit with the general tendency of your discussion that we kind of all too easily fall into the trap of paying attention to these things. My original views on iconoclasm were, my original work on iconoclasm was not so much motivated by iconoclasm itself, but rather because the ways in which images were attacked told us about our attitudes towards other images. In other words, the theology may well be the second factor in the great drive towards publicity that Daesh is now so cannily making. But they have the theological elements to hand, and the theological elements actually play on basic cross-cultural human responses to all images. In other words, you know, we are all afraid of what images can do, or the vitality in images, and this is exemplified in extreme form by the act of all iconoclasm. So in a way, it behooves us to study iconoclasm not simply as documentation of assaults on images or critiques of particular ideology, but about our own comportment with images.
I mean, jump in with a question that I think something that has been circulating throughout all of your talks, and that's something obviously as I'm probably the least qualified of all people up here to ask questions, because I'm just an ordinary quote-unquote consumer of these images that reach us, and perhaps somebody has thought a little bit about how images work. So far, there seem to be two camps. Are they communicating Daesh? Are they communicating with the West or the region? There could be something like a multimodal communication. There could be a communication that is very complex, that sends certain messages to one part of the world and certain messages to other parts of the world. And I think if we're, say, going back to one of the basic insights of globalization theory, the idea that these are separate parts of the world, in a sense, is true because obviously we're not in Baghdad here. On the other hand, there is a contextus, a materially grounded contextus via oil, via a history of invasions, via a history of migrations. So the link is there. And I think what I gathered from your presentations that I found immensely insightful is that if they have realized something, and maybe it's something that you don't even need to cognitively realize, you can just do it effectively. If you know how image works, if you go into an ad agency or somebody who produces fashion images that give you those wings, they're really very flash. Often they can't quite cognitively tell you what's right about this image. They just do it. Some people have a feel for it, and they seem to be very, very savvy at it. So that's one question I have for you. Isn't there like a complexity of that communication, an incredible savviness? Second thought I had, if we shouldn't, and it's something that David, you there should be something like a critical psychology involved in studying these images, but also maybe it seems we need to revert to psychology or psychological study of totalitarianism. What is it in that kind of regime, in the broadest sense of the term, as in the politics that appeal to purification, whatever that idea of purity is, because obviously there would be people who tell you, well, that is really not what being pure is about. Very sensible, reasonable people. That. And then who are the constituencies, or who are the consumers, who are the potential joiners? To what kind of character does that appeal? And what are their histories? Currently in Germany, there's a big debate after Cologne, what was going on in Cologne, in all these attacks on women. And there are people who are starting to investigate what's the concept of masculinity, or what are the male histories behind this assault. I'm just going to throw this at you and see if anybody of you wants to respond to that. Less than a question than an observation.
I can say a few
Yes.
words about their media savvy.
Yes.
As some of you already know, ISIS has a media center, and it's known as Al-Hayat, which means life, and its logo is a ripoff of Al Jazeera. So they understood very clearly that the Al Jazeera aesthetic and glossiness would be appealing. And Al-Hayat Media Center has many different departments, and they tend to different kinds of media productions, including magazines and recruitment videos and romantic biographies of death videos and so on. And many of them are produced with a different demographic in mind. So their marketing sort of techniques are deployed differently depending on the consumership. So for example, Dalvik is Western oriented. It's in English, now it's in French, which also appeals not just to the francophones of French, but Tunisia and the Maghreb as well. So Dalvik is easy for us to use, and we can assume then that ISIS is Western oriented because we can actually access the material very easily. But then they also have a whole range of other materials that we're not culling closely enough, because you'll find, for example, that they've just created a new magazine, which is the equivalent of Dalvik, called Constantinia, which is, right, the old Constantinople. And that is produced solely in Turkish. And their inaugural issue was about how it is necessary for the Muslim Ummah to reconquer Constantinople and to change the now museum of Hagia Sophia back into a mosque. Forget about the church, but back to a mosque. And I was in Istanbul and saw a pro-ISIS demonstration. I landed by chance in this demonstration, took photos of it. And they were waving the ISIS flags and they were chanting slogans about how Istanbul would be reconquered for the Islamic faith, and how monuments that are non-Islamic or that have been transformed into a museum site will be re-Islamized. So, in some sense, the bombing of this past week of the Hippodrome is very much related to that demographic. And ISIS draws quite a few operatives from Turkey. And in fact, that logo that you guys saw on the flag, Muhammad is the messenger of God, you might just think it's in a circle, but that's actually the signet ring of the Prophet Muhammad held in a palace in Istanbul, the Palace.
Right.
That's his prophetic imprimatur. So there's a really close link and close dialogue with a Turkish citizenry that is more and more involved.
Can I follow on that in a question that both Hugh and Christy can maybe clarify? Is there a sense of how these develop? In other words, let's say Al-Hayat devises first Al-Dabir or Dabir and then Constantiniya, or is there a sense of how they are sort of building up as they go?
I don't really know. I didn't know about Constantiniya. So
Yeah.
you told me about it right now.
I have a PDF,
How it's
yes.
possible to
Yeah. And in fact, if you go to certain parts of Istanbul, like Fatih and other areas, we have ISIS paraphernalia stores.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, I bought a series of things very easily, in fact.
Yeah.
So there's actually, I wouldn't say widespread support, but there is a pocket of support for ISIS that is quite open, actually.
Is there a chronology to these?
I would say that Dabik came first. Constantiniya is a new development, much more overtly, declaratively, proudly engaging in the Turkish direction. The Arabic language material tends to occur over Twitter, and on average, ISIS issues, I believe, 2,000 tweets per day. Or it might be even 20,000. It's one of those. I might be a zero. I think it's 20.
Either is pretty impressive.
Yeah, I think it's 20,000 tweets a day, and they refer to them as mujah tweets. Mujah tweets. And the State Department in the United States has admitted that they're utterly impotent against that armature, that kind of onslaught, the Twitter feed. And one of the goals, I think, one of the things that has to be done, perhaps in a research collaborative that perhaps you can think about establishing, is to have a number of people really comb through all the mujah tweets and to see how the rhetoric about any range of themes will line up with the hyperlinked images as well, because that's where you have your Arabic language demographic, and you're also looking at the appended images.
Then also, I think where we should open the floor immediately, but I just following up directly on what you were saying, I have another very simple question, but I think it's probably also goes to the core issue. Who is Daesh? Not a single person. There is a single person, or not even a group of 10 can generate 20,000 tweets, obviously. So we're dealing also with a context. It's not just organization, but it's also a context population, which brings us back to the question of the totalitarian formation, which actually, and I was just thinking of that, and brings me back to something you mentioned during his talk. You said we were kind of you certainly weren't going to clear ISIS or Daesh, but I would say you can talk about homoeroticism without not doing clearing. Clearing would be a position that claims to speak in favor of a progressive politics of sexual difference, whereas homoeroticism is part and parcel of, or can be, not all forms, but can be part and parcel of the totalitarian regime. And look at the Nazis.
Yeah.
And I'm just talking about the manifest and homosexual components of the SI, but about homoeroticism in general. That is a very close thing to what we know. So who is Daesh, and what is that entity that we're psychologically, in terms of what's the structure of their desire, to bring up that very old psychoanalytic question, which might be very apropos these days, I think.
It is totalitarianism, but it's totalitarianism means Wikipedia. It's a crowdsourcing model. Right? Daesh is not a person or a group of people. It's a crowdsourced activity.
It's a swarm.
What's that?
It's a swarm.
It's a swarm. And it's totalitarianism meets our new networking systems in which we can crowdsource information, act upon it, and then ex post facto claim to be acting in the name of that entity. So Daesh is a very nebulous organism. I suppose you could say. And it's only manifested and materialized through bodies and actions thanks to the internet, really.